Can everybody hear at the back? So we usually have microphones, but today I think we're just going to have to shout. I'm Kerry Hunter, undisputed queen in the north. My wife said she'd give me 50p if I introduced myself that way. I've got quite a few books under my belt by now, I think 8. Most of them featuring lovely northern lasses stomping up on the moors, getting in scraps and eating biscuits. In terms of this panel, which is going to be about challenging the lesbic norms, so what you would expect when you pick up a lesbic book and what necessarily, or what we're not writing, what we do write, what we don't write, why we write what we write. I wrote a series of 3 crime novels set in Peak District, which initially perplexed quite a lot of readers who were expecting their crime to be, well, more romancy. Somewhat ironically, the leading ladies, Meg and Sana from that series, now regularly crop up whenever the issue of favourite lesbic couples is mentioned, so go figure out. We have Ileandra Young, the bewildered and confused in her own words. She's no idea why she's here, but since she is, she plans to stick around as long as possible. Illy writes more about vampires than she probably should, it's a thing, and secretly plots world domination by way of mature cheddars, savoury crackers, and the unleashing of her adorable and video game obsessed kids upon the unsuspecting. She has a book too about vampires, but it also has werewolves, demons and guns, so for her it's a step away from the norm. Careful though, ask her too much and you will get your ear chewed off, in a nice way. Next to her we have Michelle Grubb. Michelle is a proud resident of the very posh East Riding of Yorkshire, where by day she marvels at the University of Hull's students' ability to stay alive despite immeasurable stupidity. By night she's even less enthralling with the odd bit of DIY and her obsession with spinning, on a bike that is, in her lounge in Lycra. She promises... Why are you wearing it?
Why indeed?
She says she promises to write another book as soon as she's finished plotting it. Next to her is Charlotte Green, who's come all the way from the US of A. She describes herself as the nerdy and learned. Charlotte came by airplane and train to be here today from Texas. Her recent and upcoming novels include Ghosts and Spooks, with some lesbian romance thrown in to lighten the mood. She will entertain all questions about her books, her craft, her gorgeous wife, and their cat. So feel free to bend her ear later. Right, so first things first. What actually are the norms? If we were to say what is a normal lesbic book, would anybody sort of like know what they would expect in terms of that? And we're talking sort of like, I'm talking lesbic here as in indie and small press, not sort of mainstream, because the term only seems to apply to those, not like Sarah Waters and, well, Sarah Waters really. So I've put down here that the 3 R's of lesbic: romance, romance, romance. You'll all recognise the formula if you're a regular reader. It goes a lot like this. We've got girl meets girl, the eyes across a crowded room, pulses quicken, palms go damp. They're instantly smitten, they probably clash a bit, then they admit that they're smitten, they have a few mind-blowing orgasms, then they have a tiff, then they get back together in time for the happy ever after. Phew. Which usually involves even better sex. So, it works. It sells by the bucket load. Readers want it. So why the hell would anybody write anything different? Is basically what we're here to discuss. So, if there's a standard formula that readers want to read, why do we take away from that? You wrote about vampires.
Largely because I don't know the formula.
That is another question. Did you actually, before you wrote your book, did you even know that there was a standard lesbian formula?
No, I didn't. I did get picked up in the editing process towards the end, where I was told I might have cheated my way to the happy ending because I didn't follow that formula. And I thought, oh, never mind. It's supposed to be about vampires anyway. So I kind of, what I did know, not so much the whole formula, but what I did know was that there should be a happy ending or a happy for now ending. And I was perfectly happy to have that, after all that vampires were dealt with. But I didn't do the work beforehand following that formula to get to the happy ending. So I now know the formula. I didn't know the formula, and that's why I didn't follow it to begin with. But now that I know it, I probably still won't
I was going to say, would you feel pressured to fit into it?
No, because for me, well, that's a romance formula, isn't it? And I don't really write romance because it frightens me. And there's not enough guns in it, and there's not enough vampires in it. It is a thing, I'm sorry. But yeah, I think because there is a formula, it's quite nice to step away from it and not follow it on purpose rather than by accident. Because if you do it on purpose, then you can play about with that formula and do funny things with it. And that, from a writing standpoint, is actually a lot more fun than just following the tracks.
So Michelle, you had a couple of books that you could kind of shove into the romance.
Absolutely.
Your first two, weren't there?
Yeah.
Did you write them accidentally as kind of more formulaic? Were you aware that there was a formula?
No.
Or did they were just there as...
Well, actually, as a child, I read Mills and Boon. Not a child, but I was sure I was about 12. So I did know there was a formula. I didn't obviously realise it was a formula. You don't read Mills and Boon and think, oh, there's a formula.
I mean, it is literally a formula. Radcliffe will have, there is a formula. There is a percentage of what you should be doing in these books and when.
And it's the same,
mathematical.
It's the same almost for, well, it is the same regardless of whether you're writing lesfic or straight romance, the formula
Absolutely.
is similar. So I did know that that's how a romance went. I didn't realise though that that's how every romance went. I thought it was, maybe I was just picking the ones that went like that. So I think it's, when there is a formula, it is easier to write. It's just a little bit repetitive as an author to continue to write it. So it's okay. I think if that's what's, everyone loves a good romance, and isn't it the world's largest selling genre or something? So it's perfectly okay. I think that there gets to a point though when your brain, as an author, just sends itself off into little tangents. So you come up with something else that doesn't fit that necessarily that formula, and I think that's where I headed. But still managed to slot it in, so I didn't get too much grief.
Is this with the Fifth Gospel? Yeah.
So I didn't get too much grief from
How would you
editors.
describe, genre-wise, how would you describe the Fifth Gospel?
No
It's
idea.
got a bit of everything in it. I made some notes.
If I was a Catholic, I probably wouldn't describe it particularly well at all.
It was kind of Da Vinci Code-esque mystery.
There's a little bit of everything, and then with a bit of romance.
With some religion. And,
Yeah. Hate mail, you get loads of hate mail if you write about Catholic people. Not Catholic people, I didn't mean that, the religion.
The religion.
Yeah.
And Charlotte?
So I absolutely started by using the formula, like very aware.
Were you a lesbian reader beforehand? Or
No.
were you just...
I mean, a little bit.
Aware
I read
of
George Beers and Radcliffe quite a bit, but I set out to do a lesbian version of 50 Shades of Grey. That was my first book. I was like, I'm going to write the lesbian version of this, and it won't, it's going to actually have BDSM, and it's going to actually...
Was that Palette?
That's Palette for Love,
Yeah.
and the follow-up Canvas for Love. But as Michelle mentioned, I kept writing romance. My first 4 books were romance, and it's not what I read. And I wanted to write horror. I wanted to write mystery because that's what I read for fun. So that was my main kind of getting off. I was like, well, I'm just going to do this one ghost novel and see. And it was such a different writing experience. I think I was forcing myself into the formula, and I don't need to do that anymore, basically.
How did your readers react to your switch? Were they bothered by it?
I've gotten a lot of reviews like she finally feels like she is happy to do this, right? So I think they felt it too. They felt like
downward fingers.
I think they felt that almost like a lifting that I was doing what I should have been doing probably from the beginning.
On that kind of theme, is it difficult to balance an urge to write for your own pleasure, to write what you want to write against a desire to sell well? Because we'll all know from experience that our less romantic books are the ones that perhaps don't hit the sales that a more typical kind of romance would.
Yes, absolutely. I think that was why I was afraid to do it to begin with. But it just felt to me like I either had to change or I needed to stop writing.
I think there's I mean, I got lucky, I think, in that I kind of started out, when I wrote Snowbound, I didn't really know what the formula was, but I accidentally wrote to it anyway. And that kind of got me a bit of a readership, and then I did another couple of books that kind of almost stuck to the plan, and then went to crime and was lucky enough to take readers with me. And I think that's probably the way round that Bold Strokes would advise you, if they were to advise you. They would say, write something typical, and then kind of edge away with your readers that you've got from your typical kind of story for them. But then you'll just come storming in with vampires and werewolves, and why the hell not? So how important is it to create variety within lesbic? I mean, it's difficult because lesbic is seen as a genre in itself by some readers. And it's just, instead of having a genre within it, like your crime and your sci-fi, your futuristic, your historical, they will just see lesbic as that genre. So they can't distinguish then the kind of the sub-genres really, which we would all recognise from mainstream. So you will get, quite a lot of sniffiness if you write a book that doesn't have the 2 + 2 = happy ever after. But how important is it for authors to actually create variety? There are readers out there for that variety. Do you hear from readers a lot? Do you get feedback saying, thank goodness you've written something different? Or do you get feedback from readers saying, I hated this because it wasn't what I wanted it to be?
I think first and foremost, you have to write for yourself.
Yes.
I think you reach a certain age, which I've reached, where you don't actually care what everyone else wants to read. So you end up writing what you want to write. And then once you've got that story, then I suppose you do have elements of trying to think about, well, what, if I kill everyone off at the end, that really is going to be a bit shit and no one's going to want to read that. That's actually not that pleasant. But you get to a point, I think, where you write for yourself, because it's such a long and lonely process doing it. If you start writing, well, it's fine to start writing in that formula, it gets you going and all of that thing, but I think you do have to branch out, and if your readers come with you, they come with you. I generally don't write, I don't care really. People like, that's not right. It's not that I don't care. I don't think when I write a new book, will I take a reader with me? That's not my thought process at all. If they want to, it's the same as when I choose a book in the library or a bookshop. I don't necessarily choose something that I've read the same author write. I choose it based on what it is. And if I have read an author in the past and I pick up their next book and I happen to think I'd enjoy it, then I'll read it. Actually, I don't go to a bookshop, I go to the library at East Riding because it's very posh. And so it's not, I don't think I write for anyone in particular other than myself, selfishly.
But you're with those characters and you're with that book for a long time, though.
You have to
it
like
takes me
them,
a
don't you?
year to write a book. If I wasn't happy
That's
writing
you
what I'm
chisel it
writing,
out on a stone tablet first.
I write longhand. It's a thing. But it does. I mean, I'm a paramedic, so I work I write in between shifts. My brain doesn't work for probably 50% of the year, but I'm still with those characters a long time. How long does it take you to?
Sorry, Kieran, I can't hear you. How can you?
Sorry, love, yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say it takes us a long time to write a book. So if you're not enjoying what you're writing, it's a hell of a long time to be stuck with characters and a plot and a genre that you're not liking, basically. How long does it take you to write?
It varies actually, because I've started changing how I write, so I plot a lot first, which I never used to do. So the actual writing part is really quick. The plotting part can take months. But that's when I'm discovering the characters and learning who they are. And if I don't like them, I'm not going to write the book, because it's like you've said, it's so lonely. It's a very intimate thing that we're doing. So if we're trapped by ourselves, with these characters, you need to enjoy being with them. Otherwise, it will show in what you write. It will show that you don't want to be there. And readers do notice. They do notice. So I'm a noob. So I have that one book. I'm not thinking necessarily about will people follow me. I mean, I hope they do, because it's not the first one. There's more to come, But I'm far more interested in building on the relationship I've created with Danica and Rain, and if I can do that and enjoy what I'm writing about these two characters, then I can't possibly be the only one. And so for me, I feel if I write it in a genuine way and I have a true connection with the characters that I'm writing, other people will feel that and they'll come with me, hopefully.
On the sort of on the theme of that, what's the best feedback you've ever had from someone who's enjoyed your work just for for what it is? Did it make all the hard work worthwhile?
One of my best friend's mum sent me an email after reading the Fifth Gospel, and which was horrendously embarrassing because I'm like, she would have read the sex scene. And I always tell people I know that my mum wrote the sex scene, so I didn't tell her that. But it was nice feedback from someone. I think it's lovely to get feedback from strangers, but from someone who you know, who's bothered to read your book, who's of a different generation, and who gives, just bothers to do that. I think that was quite special for me.
Yeah, and I feel like some of the feedback I've gotten where they really got what I was doing, and it, I think I absolutely want to bring my readers with me, and but one of the things that I've been noticing is that I'm getting new readers who are looking for exactly what I'm making now. So my old readers are saying, "Oh, you're doing something different, but I like this, and I can tell that you like this." And then my new readers are like, "I've been looking for a ghost story, just like this," and it reminds me of some of my favorites. So. When I see that they see that, it absolutely makes it worth it.
Have you found yourself, because you're not necessarily writing typical stuff, have you found yourself having to market in a different way, looking outside of the sort of like the lesbian field for readers, new blogs or different review sites? Have you tried sort of different avenues, or have you just kind of sat within the Bold Strokes kind of sphere? Left it as it is. Has anybody ever tried?
I'm going to be labelled as lazy. The answer is no. No to that.
I mean, it is difficult and it can be soul destroying. When I wrote No Good Reason, I thought this was probably my most crossover with mainstream that I was ever going to do. So I went to Crime Writers of America, and I tried like our local bookshops, and the crime writers didn't recognise Bold Strokes as a publisher, so that was kind of out, and the local bookshop didn't want to stock it, and it is really difficult. And then along came Cara Hunter, who is a mainstream crime writer, who has been Richard and Judy listed and all sorts, and there's loads of people who bought my books accidentally thinking that I was her. So I was first. She almost stole my name. It's absolutely not me riding on her coattails. But I have seen the sales of the Dark Peak series go over here, and Radcliffe must wonder what the hell's going on, basically, because they are selling, they're charting probably higher than they were when they were first released. I do get the odd snarky kind of bit of feedback from, I had one from some straight guy who obviously picked it up accidentally and was appalled that anybody would write lesbian characters just doing their jobs, working as doctors and police officers, and it was as if, and he's obviously never worked in the NHS because my God, there are so many queer people. You cannot move on our ambulance station without tripping over a gay chap or a bisexual or what have you. So yeah, that was quite funny. That was accidentally reaching the mainstream. But not everybody can kind of ride on the coattails of a Richard and Judy listed author, I suppose. So I just got lucky. Right, Bold Strokes. I remember when we were told to write a blurb that you were supposed to hint at a romance no matter what, even if there wasn't really one in there. Do you feel pressured? Did you feel any pressure sort of submitting something a bit different to kind of fit it into that mould, even if it didn't fit into that mould? And if so, how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I was absolutely asked, what is the romance? After I submitted the book proposal, what is the romance?
So before you even got past proposal stage?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What did you say?
I said that there was one.
Did you lie?
There is, but the book is probably 80% ghost story, 20% romance. And so to me it didn't feel fair to romance readers to market it as a romance when, yes, it has a romance, but it's not the entire...
Deep plot kind of rather.
Yeah.
Definitely not a plot.
What was the question again?
Did you feel pressurised by sort of publisher?
No, I put the pressure on myself actually. I didn't, and I didn't feel pressurised by by bold strokes at all. So I think I made a choice to make my life easier by doing it that way. And I'm not convinced I wouldn't necessarily do it again, but probably to a lesser extent, or not so much a conscious choice to actually do that. So I think the Fifth Gospel could have been written without any romance at all, really. But it was my choice to put it in.
Didn't feel pressured exactly, because with both ways there was an element of it there. Tiny clock. But I was very conscious of the fact that it wasn't a romance story. It just wasn't. That's not what I wanted to write. That's not what came out when I finished writing. So when I was working on the blurb for that, I've written this, lovely 150-word piece and gone, oh, there's no hint in here at all. Back to the drawing board, and of course, I know. And I've just finished kind of putting the finishing touches on the blurb for the second one, and having been through the experience once and understood what the expectations are, I'm sitting there again thinking,
Just makes you a little bit twitchy, doesn't it?
it does a little bit, because I don't want to disappoint anybody, but I don't want to disappoint myself. And I don't want to mislead anybody either, because it's not fair. But I also do want to highlight that these two characters who were hinting at it in the first one have problems in the second one, which are because they're in a budding relationship. But that's not what the story is. It's kind of, it's not even D-plot, it's like Z-plot.
That's what I reckon.
What are you playing for?
I don't know, but they're all from Lesbic.
Oh,
right.
That's what it's
Cricket. It's cricket.
not sports.
That sounds more like a protest. Anyway, in terms of our readers, what can they do? Because we have a captive audience here. What can they do to try and encourage diversification? If they want sci-fi, crime, young adult, fantasy, dystopian, what can they do to try and sort of encourage us? Is it reviews? Is it feedback? Is it spreading the word? Is it a bit of everything?
I think it's all of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely all of that. Because as a reader, I got to a certain stage. When I first discovered lesbic, lesbic romance, I was just enthralled by it. But it has a certain shelf life as a reader. You get to a stage where you want something different or something more or something else. And I found it quite difficult, even at the time, to even find an English author. I think I found your book, which I don't remember the name, but I'm sure. And
I'm sure you loved it.
I thought it was great. And I thought that was quite refreshing, having an English lesbic author. But if nobody knows and nobody is aware that people want to hear or read those sorts of different stories, then they just may not happen. So people do need to say and be quite vocal about it. There's nothing wrong with writing a review and saying, this was a lovely romance, the story was brilliant, or this was a great story, but it would have been just as good without the romance. It's not an insult to hear that, and it can help steer people in different directions which they may have not felt enough courage to go down before.
I think there's always the review that is the counterpoint to kind of anger from Arkansas. We're all after those reviews, the ones that that love the book for what it is, for what it was always meant to be, not for what it isn't, not for what that angry person thinks that it should have been, just because they're stuck by kind of conventions. Do we have any questions? We have a few minutes left, and if not, I've got some questions for you guys.
You talk about formulas, and life isn't a formula, is it? You talk about having to follow a certain method in order to write a love story. But if you're writing a love story, life isn't a formula. Life is very ups and downs. So I struggle to see why, when writing a love story, you have to follow this happy, sad,
Happy again.
type. Yeah, when life isn't like that,
What's wrong
if
with
you're
your
writing-
life? That's exactly right.
wrong with my
Speciality
life, but it's, but no, but for, you know, I just struggle to see that, you know, that as authors you are obliged to follow this set pattern when, you know, when we all know that life isn't like that and that it has to be, you know, yes, have a little bit of the happy sad bits, but it just seems really sad that you have to follow such a set way of writing.
It's less of an obligation than a kind of advisory almost, because that formula works, and it's kind of what people who are reading within the genre, especially within lesbian fiction, kind of expect. I mean, there are loads of authors kicking back against it. There is loads of variety coming out of publishers, coming out of the indies. So it's nice to see. I mean, we've got, you know, all sorts of writers here. Jane Fletcher with fantasy and sci-fi and historical fiction. It's just that you're writing it knowing that you will probably take a few hits for it, either in sales or in feedback, reviews and whatnot, which is why the positive kind of feedback is so important.
Yeah, it's a little like, I mean, I got the impression that the formula is like Starbucks or McDonald's. Like, we know people want this because people keep buying it.
Yeah.
But Starbucks could come out with, you know, a new drink and some other people will buy that one, right? Or, I just get the impression like any business, they know what will sell and they're just a little bit reluctant to vary.
I mean, you will often see authors, you know, somebody like D. Jackson Lee who writes, she's got a really set kind of pattern to her books. She'll do sort of Deep South, horses are often involved. And then she wrote her Dragon and Horse trilogy and probably took a hit on it. She obviously wanted to write it and probably had amazing fun with it and probably needed that switch away from what she usually did. But she's gone back to writing what she's, you know, successful and known for. It's just that's kind of the cycle that occurs, really, I think. You just have to, sometimes you have to step away from the formula just for your own kind of sanity. But the ones I think who stick to it are probably the ones who are the most consistently successful in terms of sales.
I do think it has a lot to do with the financial aspect of what sells and what doesn't, unfortunately. And there's also the escapism involved in reading a book, if that makes sense. People I've spoken to, like in my friendship circle, if they read romance, they read it because they know what they're getting, they know what emotional experience they will have, and that's what they want. And if they don't get that when they pick up a romance book, then it's disappointment or anger. There's not much in between in this little circle of friends. And I think it's not so much an obligation, but an understanding that for many folk who read romance, that's what they're looking for, and catering to that. It's very much an example of writing for your audience, I think. Unless, of course, you like writing that kind of thing, then you can write it for yourself too, but I think it's much more of a writing to meet the expectations of the people who look for romance. I mean, I don't even know how many years back this was, but I did look into Mills and Boon just to see what they wanted, and it was a page, quite literally, of by chapter 1 this has happened, by chapter 2 this has happened.
It's a really set on Mills and Boon.
But I thought about it a bit more, and I just thought, actually, every single book follows that formula, and people buy it, and people love it, so they know what they're doing.
It's a massive skill to write that. It's, you know, it takes
It's
a lot of
put it
skill
down.
to actually write that.
I can't do it.
To actually write that clinically and tick all those boxes. It is massive skill. Yeah, go on.
I was just wondering how much you know about your readers and audience, and how you know what you know about them. Where do you get that information from?
Sorry, Kira, can you repeat the question?
It was, how much do we know about our audience and our readers? How well do we know them? And where do we get the information from?
I have a mailing list, so people can sign up to my mailing list, and I'll send them emails, not as often as I should, and then people will respond if they want to. And the list is separated out into 2 sections, so people who just want the boring this is what I'm doing email, and those people who want to know more, like, do you want samples of what I'm doing? Do you want to know what events I'm going to? Do you want to know about my indie stuff? And those people tend to be the ones that I have a talking relationship with, so they'll find me on Twitter or they'll poke my Facebook, things like that. That's how I talk to my readership. I'll podcast as well, so they can actually listen to me chatter about nonsense for a while and then respond on YouTube. But it doesn't tend to be through things like email, away from my mailing list or comments, because I should probably look at those, but I don't. Actually.
I'm not as in-depth as that.
You're quite quiet online, aren't you?
Yeah, I like to assume that everyone's lovely. And more so than me, because probably I'm not that lovely. But I'm sure I like to assume that everyone is reading things because they're interested, because they're broadening whatever they want in their life. And I just naively assume that everyone's a little bit like me, actually. But nicer.
Twitter a little bit, and then, I mean, just on the financial side, the sales records, right, also tell you a little bit about what people want, right? Actually, truthfully, but definitely Twitter's my main fan in the base, I guess.
I think Facebook for a lot of lesbic kind of readers will be on Facebook groups like the Lesbian Review group, and just interaction on there. I mean, I get quite a few sort of like private messages or emails. You can get emails from the blog, from the website, the Bullstrokes website itself. I've had a couple of messages from there recently, which I didn't know was a thing. But mainly with me, it's just chatting online, and you get to know your readers that way. I have a little Facebook group as well for the kind of more committed readers, shall we say, where we can just talk about stuff that I wouldn't necessarily put on my main kind of profile page. But yeah, I think the longer you stay as a lesbian fiction author, the more you get to know and get a good idea of what your demographic is and who you're appealing to, who other authors are appealing to, who you might want to appeal to, who you're not necessarily going to appeal to and will probably never, never kind of entertain them. But yeah, the longer you're kind of in the field, the more idea you certainly get of who is going to be picking up your books and who isn't. Any more from you while we're here? Go on.
I was wondering what makes a book qualify as lesbic? Is it just about having lesbian characters, or is it about having to write this formulaic
Well,
way?
that's a really good question.
The question was, what qualifies a book as lesbian?
Lesbian romance.
By and large, yeah.
That's kind of where we're landing in this discussion, isn't it?
Well, you need a lesbian.
Yes.
Definitely. You definitely need lesbian.
Hopefully two.
Of some description. Or, anywhere within 3 or 4.
But yeah, that seems to be it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
An orgy of lesbians. Manage that.
I mean, I
Something
think the
like
standard
that,
is a
please.
lesbian romance.
Yeah. That's the problem that we kind of, well, not a problem, it's the happy little thing that we bang our heads against, is that people who will say lesbic will be meaning, the romance, the formula that I described at the start, and some people have difficulty kind of accepting that within that umbrella term, there are other genres.
But does that mean you then find yourself in a bubble, effectively? Because heterosexuals don't think it's het-fig.
No, yeah.
So, are we kind of
Absolutely.
marginalising ourselves?
That's a good one, though.
I like it.
Well, I mean, one thing I will say about my most recent is that I am getting some crossover readership. Unlike my lesbian romance that's read almost entirely by lesbians, I'm getting some het readers, right? Which is different.
And I'm getting accidental ones.
I get my best friend's mum, so I'm all right.
It is difficult to break out of that bubble. I think I don't know whether Bullstrokes are just kind of happy with it just being enclosed to lesbians, and and that kind of limited audience, but it is difficult to break out of it. It's difficult to pop out and, you know, pop that bubble and step out into the mainstream. And like I say, every time I've tried it, it has been like banging my head against a brick wall. So you just kind of don't really. I'm very happy with my lesbian readership. I don't feel like I need to be branching out or adapting or sacrificing my lesbian characters or dialing down on the queer or whatever to try and appeal to a mainstream audience. I'm not interested in. But if they're coming on board anyway and, you know, and reading the books for what they are, then that's absolutely fine by me as well. So more power to them. Go on.
Bearing that in mind, where do you think bisexual characters fall in with that? Do they kind of come into the lesfic, or is that a whole, probably smaller bubble by itself?
I try and include them, absolutely. So my ghost novel has a bisexual character.
As an author, I don't think there should be any boundaries to that at all.
Yeah.
You might find that there is with a reader.
Yeah. Possibly you would get a little bit of, possibly you would get a bit of negativity, shall we say?
Yeah, I just think there's
Yeah,
probably a group of
definitely.
people that
I tend not to be specific. I don't label. But I know there's, you know, ace characters coming into books. There's done. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I thought you were timing up. I think in terms of what I know about what lesbian authors are writing at the moment, they are broadening the kind of spectrum in terms of sexualities. I mean, the LGBTQ is getting a lot more letters after it, so hopefully they'll all be represented and, you know, enjoyed and in there for whatever you want to read and pick up.
I think we had one more question back here, Jessie.
There wasn't any questions, one comment.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I don't think Mary Hannah's kind of jumped the divide in that it's almost, if you take her Kate Daniels stories, it's almost incidental that Kate Daniels is gay, but they're very much crime focused and there's very little romance. And she seems to have jumped that divide between.
Has she managed to jump that divide by closeting her character though? So
Yeah,
that's the issue that I had with Murder Wall. I couldn't actually get through it because she was such a miserable queer. I don't want to read miserable queers. I want to read characters who are happy being gay and are out and are just gay and it's not an issue.
I know, she's,
Yeah, that was my issue with Mary Hannah. But yeah, she's a mainstream crime author basically who she's had quite a lot in her Kate Daniels series now, hasn't she? But yeah, I struggled to get through the first one. To be fair. No, she's not. If you're after, you know, positive kind of queer representation, it's possibly not the book. She's not here, is she? She wouldn't be.
That's time.
Time? Right, thank you very much for that. It was